I'm in Acts chapter 17, and you're looking at a statue that's in one of the used to be cities, leaving Philippi. It's called Amphipolis. It's in northern Greece, Macedonia. This was there at the time on the side of the road. And there are two names recorded. Acts chapter 17, verse 1. Now, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica. In the spring of the year, summer of the year 50, Paul leaves Philippi after having been there for a few weeks. And he leaves there without Luke. Luke is gone. There's no we section anymore today. It's just Silas and Timothy and himself. And they travel by this lion you're looking at. This is one of the remnants archaeologically of the city of Amphipolis. And Paul didn't stop there. Why not? How about Apollonia? All I can say is the strategy of Paul is to go to urban centers. So he really does stick by. So he goes from Philippi, major center, he goes on to the next big city in that region, which is definitely Thessalonica, and Amphipolis and Apollonia are small potatoes. And he establishes churches in Philippi and Thessalonica, then they will then come out to Amphipolis and Apollonia. But there is a text. So the gospel comes to Thessalonica. Chapter 17 of Acts, the way that Luke narrates it, there are three cities in Paul's second missionary journey. We are in the spring of the year 50. He stayed a few weeks in Philippi. Then he stays a little less in Thessalonica, even less in Berea. And then, well, there's Athens. So tonight, what I'd like to do is get through at least chapter 17. And Luke narrates summarily, very quickly, what happened in the summer of the year 50 AD, which was the establishment of two more congregations besides the Philippian one, the one in Thessalonica and the one in Berea, and then on down to Athens. When Paul travels out of Philippi, he stays on the Ignatian Way, okay? And he arrives in the major city of Thessalonica, which was a major land center. There was a major road north-south in the Balkan Peninsula that came through there. But it's more importantly, a very important harbor where ships would come from all over the Mediterranean, dock there. And so it's a major hub of this region of the world, of the northern part, Macedonia, of the Roman Empire, okay? Going north, south, east, west. So Thessalonica is a major city at that time. And what we are told of the work there is definitely a summary. And so what we are told is that he goes to the synagogue of the Jews. Unlike Philippi, where there was no synagogue of the Jews, remember it takes 10 Jewish men to have a synagogue, men being those who have had bar mitzvah. Thessalonica has one, and he uses a methodology, goes into this major city, staying on the Ignatian Way about 70 miles. He arrives in Thessalonica with Luke and Silas and Timothy, and he goes, finds a synagogue, and he preaches there. What we're told quickly by Luke is they was there 3 Sabbaths, 3 weeks, okay? 3 Sabbaths, okay? And he reasoned and explained and proved that Christ, remember, we already know the basic text of Paul's sermon in a synagogue. He gives a history lesson, reaches the point of the Messiah. Everybody believes the Messiah is coming. Most of the Jews do, except the Sadducees and the Zealots. And then he introduces Jesus. That's the rest of the story that they need to know. And so there it is. Christ must suffer and die from the dead. This Jesus whom I proclaim to you is the Christ. And we have the initial reaction. Some were persuaded, joined Paul and Silas, as did, and Luke tells us the categories in society of Thessalonica that are attracted to the gospel. And he says, devout Greeks, not a few of the leading women. So Luke gets very specific about the social class and the ethnicity or cultural ethnicity of people when he describes them. And then there's the turn. Like Paul has seen for so many years, it's now the 15th year, 16th year of his preaching, okay? the Jews turned. Some Jewish leaders, here it is, jealousy. Some wicked men out of the rabble form a mob. The city was in an uproar. They attacked the house of Jason. Jason must be a recent convert, okay, seeking to bring them out. They could not find Paul. It's a good thing they didn't find them, a mob there. They dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men have turned the world upside down. They've come here also. Jason has received them. They are all acting against the decrees of Caesar." So what's the charge? They're angry Jews, but they take them before city authorities of Thessalonica. And the charge is they're violating Roman law. Well, they're violating the decrees of Caesar. Say nothing about Mosaic law or anything like that. They say there's another king. They say they're a threat. They're a political cult. Rome has long decided no new religions, no new cults that proclaim a different emperor or king. That's illegal by Roman standards. So they try that route to try to get these three men in trouble. People of the city and authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. And when they had taken money and security from Jason is post bond, they let them go. Then verse 10 says, then the brothers immediately sent Paul away. So how long was he in Thessalonica? 3 weeks, 3.5? How long? I mean, it turns sour quickly. By night they have to. So say goodbye to Thessalonica. Now a church is left behind there, some believers. Paul will not get a chance to finish everything he needed there. So he will ride back from down southern Greece when he's down in Athens. He'll write the letters of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He has some misunderstandings about second coming of Christ and things like that to clear up. So you will find that in the letters of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, okay? So in my opinion, Paul wrote Galatians in the year 49, and he writes 1st and 2nd Thessalonians in the summer of the year 50 to 51, when he's in Athens, or in Corinth, where we need to go now. So this is where we're heading now, okay? So he has to leave, and we go on to city number 3. Let me go ahead and introduce you to a concept. The way that Luke narrates this trip of Paul is really interesting. He summarizes. He can't tell you everything. He's not on this trip right now. He stayed back in Philippi. However, by inspiration and by talking to Paul, he knows more than he's giving, I think. But he summarizes. And what's interesting is if you look at just at what we call chapter 17, remember Luke didn't write in chapters, but he puts 3 experiences in Paul's evangelistic efforts, 3 experiences. Here's experience number 1, Thessalonica. What's Thessalonica? This is status quo. We don't want things to change. Thessalonica throws them out after 3.5 weeks, okay? We don't want a Messiah. Here's experience number 2. Next city we're going to on Paul's travels, Berea. This was a very different experience, okay? Berea everybody needs to be like the Bereans. The Bereans was a great experience. Sometimes in evangelism, missionary work, you run into a person that's just so open to the message to Christ, it's unbelievable. You know, you get so many doors slammed like Thessalonica, you don't expect Berea. And it's just 20 miles down the road, okay? Maybe just next door, there's somebody that wants to listen. That's Berea. But then there's Athens. Athens, what is the experience of Athens? Well, Athens, you're expecting intelligent, educated people to recognize the truth when they hear it. Guess what? You're not going to get in Athens. Not what you expect. Watch out. People with PhDs are dangerous. I've said this before. They think they know everything. Watch out. Theologians are very dangerous sometimes. N.T. Wright is so perceptive about a lot of things, but he gets some things wrong, doesn't he? And by the way, so do I. That's why you're to keep me in check. You're to study for yourself. Watch out for Athens. What's interesting about what we call Acts 17 is there are 3 reactions to the gospel. Status quo, we don't want a Messiah. We don't want to hear. 2, noble, the nobility of the Berean spirit. Ah, what a breath of fresh air. 3, sometimes too much education makes you blind to the truth. That would be the Athenian philosophers. But let's go there. Let's read with verse 10 and go to Berea first. By the way, this is the ruins. I was just in Thessalonica this past summer, and I visited these ruins again of the of Thessalonica. Thessalonica is the second largest city in Greece today. It's over a million people. It's mostly made of ugly apartment buildings, but it does have in the heart of it the marketplace of Thessalonica. I don't know where the synagogue was. They haven't found it in excavations yet, but somewhere nearby here was the synagogue that Paul preached in the spring of the year 50. Okay, so this is the ruins. And so we move on to Berea. Berea is a small town today of Greeks, 20 miles down the road from Thessalonica. It's where during the night Paul and Silas and Timothy flee to. And here's the account in verse 10. The brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. When they arrived, they went into the Jewish synagogue. There was a synagogue in Berea, 20 miles down the road. Now, the Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They received the word, examining scriptures daily to see if these things were so. Many of them believed, with not a few Greek women of high standing as well as men. But when Jews from Thessalonica, rats, everything was great, but Berea is too close to Thessalonica. It's only 20 miles. It'd take about a day and a half for angry Jews to catch up with them. Here's the turn. When the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was proclaimed by Paul in Berea also, they came there too, agitating, stirring crowds. Then the brothers immediately sent Paul off on his way to the sea. But Silas and Timothy stayed there. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens. And after receiving command for Silas and Timothy to come to him soon as possible, they departed. So in Berea, there's just a bunch of apartment buildings, not much of a city today. You will find a monument to Paul there. It says it's in Byzantine mosaics, but it has the important arrival of Paul and his 2 companions, the spring of the year 50, and the gospel being evangelized here. So, and by the way, Ignatian Road that he traveled on are still visible in the main streets, along the main streets of Berea. Okay, but I love verse 11. You will find from time to time in your travels and your journeys and your efforts to evangelize people that are open to the gospel. You'll find them in the most unexpected places. They were running from Thessalonica and ran into Berea, and there they find a more noble spirit. But unfortunately, Berea was too close to Thessalonica. If they had gone a little further, but I'm glad they didn't, because the church was established in Berea, and they were more noble. And by the way, they didn't just buy everything Paul said; they checked everything he said out. They examined the scriptures daily to make sure that the prophecies that Paul was talking about that applied to the Messiah, and they then recognized the truth when they saw it. The Berean spirit, you've heard lessons on that. You've probably shared devotionals yourself on that. It's a wonderful thing, the Berean spirit, and it's still present today. We just got to find where. And you got to go to Thessalonica to get to Berea, by the way. And there you go. Okay? Any comments or questions? Now look at where we are, up in the left-hand corner of the map. So the first 3 cities evangelized in northern Greece, Macedonia, are Philippi, 70 miles further on the Ignatian Road, Thessalonica, 20 miles further, Berea. And then the map makers draw a line. And they make the line go to the sea. Do you see it? I agree with them on that. That is, there's no way. I've been up and down there with a nice Mercedes-Benz bus. You go through the plains of Macedon, well, Alexander the Great, wild, and that's where they train their cattle, and it's a beautiful area in Greece. But it's quite a ride, and if you don't have a nice air-conditioned Mercedes-Benz bus, which Paul didn't, I recommend you go to the beach, go to the sea, and catch a boat. Okay, and he's got to get out of that area quick. Now, here's a question. Why did they target Paul? Is it like in Lystra because he's a spokesman? He's the guy that talks all the time, the guy up front? Silas and Timothy are not threatened with life, so they stay in this noble area of Berea, Thessalonica. They stay there, and they can work quietly, unassumedly. But Paul's going to die here in the spring of year 50, and the young brethren of Berea, 2 or more, accompany him, in my opinion, to the sea, like this map shows, and get him on a boat and say, go far away, south. And you see the red line go along the coast, and it bends into the major island, the Evia, between Evia and the mainland Greece, and it goes along Attica, and it turns the lowest promontory of Greece. It's called Cape Sunion, and then it goes into the port of Athens, a port called Piraeus. Okay, so and that's where in the late summer of the year 50, Paul arrives with 2 or more of the young brethren of Berea, and he's fleeing. But first, up there where he caught a ship, look to your right before you catch the ship with Paul in the spring of the summer of the year 50. That's called Mount Olympus. Does that ring a bell? That's the home of the gods, snow covered all year round, 8,000 feet, 10,000 feet up in the air, I think 8 to 10,000 feet. It is, and down at the bottom is a major city, a holy city built to Dion, or Dion, D-I-O-N, as you would write it out in Greek. And it's a fabulous holy city. There are cities built to Apollo called Delphi. There's cities built to Zeus. There are holy cities with lots of temples and religious things for sale and things like that. But this is where Paul, by all accounts, caught the boat with his young brethren Berea and sailed away to get out of harm's way in the summer of the year 50, right here as he heads south. Here's a sanctuary at Dion. That's how you spell it. Paul may have been brought here because there were a lot of ships of religious pilgrimages of pagans that came to this port, to this city that was on the coast, right at the feet of Mount Olympus. And a lot of ships would have sailed from here to the south, coming and going as ships. So it's logical to think this is how Paul fled the danger of the plot against his life in the summer of the year 50, okay? And then he lands in the port of Piraeus. Now, let me see if I have some images. No, I don't. So, forgive me. I'm trying to see if I pulled up, yeah. Let me stop the share here, share screen here, and go to this. Athens. Stop in Acts chapter 7, summer of the year 50 AD. Okay, here is the map that we're looking at. Here it is. Please find Athens. He comes in, we think, by sea. That would have been logical. And this is the verse we just read. Verse 15, Acts chapter 17. Those who conducted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and after receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they departed. So please make note. Paul hates this. First of all, I don't know if he ever planned to go to Athens. It's got to be exciting in one way, but can't be excited about how he came here. He is alone. He hates alone. He is running. He hates that. So he says to the brethren from Berea that are getting back on the ship to go home, he's saying, tell Silas and Timothy, come as quickly as they can. He hates alone. He's going to be for a few weeks in Athens, maybe more, alone. And that's the context. He arrives in Athens dejected. Okay? I'm suggesting that to you as a reader. He's not happy about how he got here. He's not come here for tourist reasons. He's come here running. And he's in a city that is the intellectual center of the world and has been ever since the 5th century before Christ. Rome is the political center of the world, but the reputation of Athens, even though it's only a city of about 40 or 50,000, it's It's in size, it's nothing compared to Rome, but it's the intellectual center, the cultural, educational center of the world. The great philosophy schools of Plato and Aristotle of the first century have been replaced lately by the two big schools called the Epicureans and the Stoics. Those are the big guns in Athens when he arrives there in the summer of year 7 of 50 AD. And those are the ones he's going to confront. Here's a quick design of what Athens looked like that in the excavations of that time. Look where Athens is on the map up in the left-hand corner. So the Acropolis, of course, is most evident today in Athens, Greece. Athens, Greece today is a city of 5.5 million people. Half of the nation of Greece lives in the city of Athens. There are 11 million Greeks and half of them live in Athens. So that's why, of course, you went to Greece with me, right, Mark? When I directed the HUD program after you,
Yeah, I did.
I lived in the campus, established the campus outside of Athens by 15 miles. It's called Portorafti. But to come into church services, there are 5 congregations of the Lord's Church in Athens today. It took me 2 hours one way to get 15 miles. Okay. So you got to want to go to church. Okay. And by the way, I had little babies at the time, my adopted boys, and one of them was car sick. He got car sick every single time we went to church. We had to bring a change of clothes. You know, 2 hours one way. One time it took me 6 hours because there were riots in downtown Athens. And I did the illegal thing and drove around the Acropolis with my van full of students. Totally illegal. Didn't care. Was trying to get to church. And I couldn't. Police was blocking everywhere because of riots. And I finally gave up. After 6 hours of trying, I took the students to Applebee's and I figured God would forgive me. I just couldn't make it. Athens was a small city in the first century, but the grandeur, the reputation of its thinking, of its philosophy schools, of the educational, of the Acropolis. The Acropolis was still in its splendor, built from 450 years before, 500 years before. The splendor of the temple to Athena was still there. Look at the view now. Today in the Mediterranean, all those tankers come from the Middle East. They all dock at the port of Piraeus, where Paul docked with his ship, no doubt. They're all Greek crews, by the way. Because the Greeks have sailed these seas for thousands of years and they know every corner. And this is the port of Piraeus. So this is the view that Paul would have had coming in the summer of the year 50. He wouldn't have seen this. This is the city today. It's huge. And by the way, all those roads you see, the 5 million, all the apartment buildings, none of which are more than 8 stories high, by the way. Nowadays, it's very cosmopolitan. There's a district from Iran, one from Iraq, one from Syria, one from. So yes, there's a lot of Greeks, but there's a lot of people from other. Because Athens is a convergence center of a lot of different parts of the world. Since it's Greece is 2,000 islands, and anybody can come illegally to Greece through various ways. If you get to Greece, you're in Europe, and then from there you can go elsewhere. So a lot of immigration, legal and illegal, happens here. Anyway, a lot of these people are descendants of various nationalities. But Paul would have, well, here it is, verse 16, first century. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So here's a humorous suggestion. Paul, the first thing he did in this city that he had always dreamed of, he spoke Greek fluently, could quote Greek poets, tragedians by memory. Where did he learn that? This is the first time in life he's in Athens, but he hates the way he came, alone and running. So he walks like a tourist, something like that. This is the road he would have come in. It's called the Panathenaic Way. Okay, it's the way of all the Athenians. This is the road from the port of Piraeus. It's about 6 miles, by the way, from the port all the way to downtown Athens. And along the way, he would have seen everywhere, left and right, along the way. There were no museums in the first century AD. Museums are an invention of the 18th, early 19th century. Museums have only been around for about 2 centuries. Where the statues, Greco-Roman gods, philosophers, Greek heroes was along the roads. That's true in Rome too. The Romans put their stuff, their mausoleums, their cemeteries, their whatever, along the roads. There were no museums. So all the statues were along the road. So Paul, coming in on the Pantheistic way, in the summer of the year 50, would have seen left and right statues of pagan gods, statues of Greek heroes, you name it, Hercules and all the rest. And there it is. The city was full of what? He must have counted them. And it instead of being amazed by the artistry and the architecture, and he was impressed by, wow, they've got more gods, more idols. This, by the way, is what's left of the ancient Athens in the agora, the marketplace. Paul will spend days and weeks by himself in where you see these green trees. The picture's taken from Mars Hill, right above, and you're down on the hubbub of the city of Athens, where the philosophy schools would have been. Look over to the left-hand corner and you'll see a temple to the god of the underworld. Okay, Hephaestus, well preserved. You see it over to the left, a well-preserved Greek temple. That's the best preserved Greek temple in the Agora. Over to the right is a reconstituted building, rebuilt. Imagine all of this area were green. Was a heart. Now, Greece had fallen to Rome, but the Romans esteemed and valued Athens as the cultural center of the world. Okay, so you're looking at now the remnants of the Agora, the time of Paul, with that beautiful building that's been rebuilt. And verse 17 says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace, every with those who happen to be there. Where does Paul go preach? Not in a synagogue. He goes mainly to the marketplace. It says he went to the synagogue. We do know there was one, but the marketplace seems to be the main avenue here. He uses the synagogue. There are many Jews in Athens, but he uses the agora. This is the agora right there. So, and right there behind in the middle of those trees, there's a spot called the bima, the speaker stone. So my guess is that was his favorite place to go talk about Jesus, to talk about the Messiah, talk about here as you're walking through the remnants of the Agora, along this place right here would have been the 10 eponomic heroes of ancient Athens. And then when he's standing on that bema one time, a few weeks into his stay, waiting for Silas and Timothy to come down, then they're in the crowd that's around him, listening to him, a specific group of people that, by the way, have a meeting place just a few blocks away in the Agora. Some think that the meeting place of the philosophers was in the Stoa, which is a covered portico that is just on the other side of the Agora. So here it is, verse 18 of Acts chapter 17. Some of the Epicurean Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. So you can stand up on this rock. You can say what you want to, but the people in the crowd can interrupt and ask questions. And look at the very nice, no, not very nice word they use for him. What is this? And the word in Greek is sparmologos, which means, what is this babbler? The translators tried their best. I don't know what your translation says. It's not a nice word, okay? It's like somebody, blah, 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 blah. They're making fun of him. What is this babbler trying to say? Others said, he's trying to introduce a new God. It's illegal to bring a new God unless the Romans approve. Foreign divinities. They've never heard of Yeshua. Yeshua. Who's Yeshua? Never heard of him. Jesus. Okay? He was preaching Jesus. Oh, one more thing. He was preaching the resurrection. Life after death. That, the Yeshua part didn't strike a bell with any of them. Never heard of them. It's been 20 years since the beginning of the church. Never heard of them. But this resurrection idea, this anastasis, is the Greek word for that. Oh, they discussed, not in connection with this guy Yeshua, but they've discussed at length in their philosophical schools and their philosophical discussions, the idea of resurrection. Now, let me make note. In the Jewish mythologies, Egyptian mythologies, there were stories of gods that killed other gods up, and then they were reborn. That's the stories of Isis, Osiris, the evil brother Set. So there was mythologies of the Egyptians, which, by the way, are under the Romans now, that they've heard of, discussed the idea of is there, resurrection reconstituting with your physical body? By the way, one of the major topics of First and Second Thessalonians is the resurrection of the dead, okay, that Paul will use there. Look at the image you have here. If you haven't been there, Mark's been there. This is the entrance to one of the concert theaters of the Agora. The Abima is just to the left. Keep going down the street, and the speaker's corner is where Paul would speak. That's where the philosopher is going to confront him. Look up, and you'll see the Acropolis. So you're in the lower parts of the Acropolis, where the temples of the Athenians are. 3 major temples: temple to Athena, of course, the temple to Nike, and the temple to the god of the sea, Poseidon. It's called Erechtheion. And you're looking at the entrance to one of their concert theaters here. Verse 19 and 20. They took. Did they physically grab him from the bema? That's possible. The Greek philosopher, authority. By the way, they can put people in prison. They have intellectual authority that spills into physical authority. Okay? What kind of ideas is this crazy guy? He's very educated. He can speak Greek quite well. They're impressed by that. But he's talking about a God we've never heard of. And he brought up the idea of resurrection. They took him and brought him. So they take him away from the down area. This is my interpretation. It's what others believe too. They took him. Where were they meeting? It's both the name of the group and it's the meeting place. It's called Areopagus. Ares is the god of war, Ares, and Pagos is the Greek word for hill. So there you have it, Mars, hill. Mars is the Latin word for Ares in Greek. So Areopagus is both the name of the group of philosophers and the place where they met. That's what I believe to be true. Okay? And they drag him up to where they meet, which is on a hill above the Agora. And we don't have any ruins or buildings left there, but by himself, in front of 50 or 100 PhDs, philosophers of Athens, the cultural center of the world, he gets asked, you need to explain yourself, dude. What is this stuff you're teaching? And by the way, you have a time limit. And don't use the wrong words. And by the way, we could throw you in prison. They can. The jails are just below. You bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Explain yourself. Is Paul having a quiet conversation? No. He's under trial, intellectual trial, and he could be imprisoned if he trips over a couple of things. What happens, Here are the ruins of the Temple of Hephaestus. You can see these from the Mars Hill where he's at. Here's the Temple of Hephaestus. Please make note before we have that incredible, we'll close with that tonight. The of not himself, but of the gospel that he preaches, the marvelous Athenian speech. Luke tells you, as he describes this, you got to understand the attitude of all these PhDs in philosophy. Watch out. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend all their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. There was a professor from Pepperdine that coined this nowism, the cult of nowism. Anything old is to be discarded. Every generation, some get this bug. It's a bad disease. You think that the only thing that are valid or useful or meaningful are things that are new. and old things must be thrown away. We should not retain anything from our past or from our grandma. Okay. Luke is cutting the Athenians down. He says they think they're so smart. They're the cultural epicenter of the world. And yet they're obsessed only with new things. If it's old, they've already put it aside. So what is he going to say? This is again another one of rebuilt buildings of the Agora. There is the place across the hill from where Paul will be put on trial by the philosophers, where we have the birth of democracy. Okay, this is where democracy was born in Athens, Greece, in the 5th century before Christ. So there's some remarkable landscapes, politically, socially, culturally, but the most important landscape, the one that most people visit today, is the one that's at the feet of this. You're looking at the attempt by the Greeks to reconstitute the Acropolis. It was one of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world, the House of Athena. It would have been built with marble 400 something years before. It took 11 years to build. It was a masterpiece. It was from the 5th century all the way to the 17th century. It was one of the great masterpieces of the ancient world and of the modern world, until a cannonball from a Venetian ship hit it, and the Turks had put gunpowder in there, and it sent everything to smithereens. Since the modern Greeks are trying to put it back together piece by piece. But in Paul's day, there was, look at it. This is the entrance, the Propileion to the Mars Hill, to the Acropolis, the high point where the temples of the gods of the ancient Greeks were. This is it right here. You're looking down on it now from a helicopter or drone. There it is in the landscape of Athens, the holy place of the pagan gods. Okay. You could have seen priests and priestesses snaking up that hill and going into the temple every day, taking offerings. Okay. And Mars Hill is just down at the feet of this. This is the temple of Athena. This is the western side. The eastern side is where the entrance and the statue 40 foot high of Athena was, made out of gold or silver and stone. And Paul will make note of that. This is the temple to the god Poseidon with the porch of the maidens. So here, and let's read it and close tonight. The marvelous speech. Paul, let me interject some words from time to time. Standing by himself in the middle of the meeting of the Areopagus, 50 to 100 PhDs in philosophy. They were hostile, putting him on trial. This is what he says. Note, please, that in this summary of his speech, I think it's a summary, he never quotes. Why? Because he's talking to philosophers, right? The scriptures don't do anything for them. They don't know them. What does he quote? A Greek poet, a Greek tragedian, by memory. That's impressive. He's got to talk to the people that are in front of him. And he's trying to convert one or more of however many is out there. They're hostile. How dare you come into our city and bring new ideas? And this is how he starts. Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. Now, most commentators think that this is a compliment that Paul's paying him. Let me only suggest to you, it could be the opposite. This could be interpreted religious, or it could be interpreted superstitious. If he's saying, well, you got 276 statues of gods on the pantheistic way, he's not really complimenting them. And by the way, there's something he knows about Greek philosophers, whatever school they're from. They pretend that they believe in the gods, but they really don't, especially one of the two schools. They pretend. They are not atheists publicly, but they are atheists privately. They basically, the philosophy schools, are an alternative to the Greco-Roman gods in their way of life. They're not just a degree from a university now in philosophy. They're actually a form of religion, but they can't openly say the Greco-Roman gods don't exist because the temple of Athena is right behind them. The temple of Poseidon is right behind them. But Paul knows that. So he says, you're very religious. As I passed along, as I was doing my tourist thing, my first few days I was here, I observed the objects of your worship. As I was walking up the Panathenaic Way, I saw an altar. And we have found two of these, by the way, in archaeologically speaking. To agnostotheo. They are so scared they missed the god that they sculpted. There were many of them. There was one in the walk up to Athens that said, to the unknown God. They're afraid that an unknown God is going to get their feelings hurt and take their vengeance out on them. So they have one to whatever your name is. And so Paul takes that as an introduction to, let me tell you about the one you don't know. You were scared you missed one. You did. The only one that really does exist. But therefore you worship as unknown, I proclaim to you. And then he starts, and there are basically 3 points in this great speech that you know. He starts by saying, God is the creator of all things. He created you Greeks, created us Jews. He's the creator. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. Whoa. What did he just say? In the shadow of what? One of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world? What did he just say? He did not say that. He just said, God does not live in that beautiful Pentelian marble temple that everybody comes to see. And still today, everybody goes to see the Acropolis, even in he doesn't live there. Nor is he served by human hands. And sneaking behind them are all these priests going up the Propylaeon into the temple. Since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. He doesn't live there. He doesn't live there. He doesn't live there. Now, they might have passed on this one because Athena is supposed to live there. That's a house to her. Who is this God? Of course, your God doesn't live there. Maybe that's the way they interpret it. God is the creator of all things. Point number 1. He made from one man every nation of mankind, Jews and Greeks. I'm a Jew. You know that. You're a Greek. You know that. To live, by the way, speaking in Greek is speaking fluently. They have to be impressed. Having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. You know, you think Alexander the Great and Pharaoh's in charge of the world, but actually it's God who's it's the providence of God. God is a God of real history, and he determines things, and he set the boundaries and the dwelling places, and he's set within each man the desire to seek God in hope that they might feel their way towards. He wants every human being. There are things innate and born in every human being, whatever culture you're in, that make you yearn for the divine. You've been looking for God. I'm here to tell you where he's at, and he's not up there. Point number 2, God created you and me, the Jews and the Greeks, and he sustained us all these centuries. The Jews have existed for 2,000 years. The Greeks have existed for 3,000 years. He is actually not far from each one of us. And then he quotes from Menander, and he quotes from Aratus. He quotes from a Greek poet. He quotes, and they immediately know. He doesn't have to say their name. Hey, he's quoting Menander. He's quoting Aratus. In him we live and move and have our being. And he appropriates it to the God that he's presenting. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Who's he? So being that we are all God's offspring, we ought not to think that's a divine being. And he's saying, now what's he saying? Not only does the God I'm introduced to you not live there, but he's not made of gold or silver or stone. The statue, 40 foot high of Athena, was made of those materials. An image formed by a art of man and imagination of man. You know, Callicrates and Ictinus had built the Parthenon. And the greatest sculptor, Phidias, had fashioned the statue of Athena. He's saying, great art, but that's not God. He's getting away with it. He's with it because they're philosophers. Here she is, the reconstruction of a 40 foot high. You could only see her from the eastern entrance, because all entrances of pagan temples face the east. There she was in the middle. You couldn't go in the temple, only priests could. And number 3, and he finishes, and we conclude tonight. The times of ignorance God overlooked. You have overlooked the God of the creation, You have gotten lost in Athena and Apollo, and now he commands all people, Greeks included, to repent. This is like the closing of a sermon. It's a come to Jesus moment. Okay? And I can't believe the courage of him. He's talking to 100 philosophers. He has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by, watch out. How does he get? He's not concluded, by the way. He's not finished. He's getting towards the end. But he uses the word, raising him from the resurrection, anastasis. And that's when the philosophers say, whoa, stop right there. Okay, this is the Mars Hill. In my opinion, even though there are some that place this speech that he gave alone to 100 philosophers, put it down there by the temple of Hephaestus, I think it's Mars Hill. It's an outcropping of rock just above the Agora. And behind this is the temple of Athena. Okay, so there's what's left of Mars Hill, Areopagos. It's in this landscape. He gives a courageous, solitary proclamation to 100 Greek philosophers. This is what the Acropolis looks from below. See those people standing up? That's where I think maybe there was a structure. I don't know. Most think that was the meeting place of the Agora. And here it is right there. And that, remember the question they started with. So when they heard the word anastasis, when they heard resurrection of the dead, that's it. They started catcalling, interrupting, mocking. Okay. Others said, maybe we'll hear you next time. They didn't throw him in prison, which they could have. Worse, they dismissed him. You're irrelevant. We've already discussed resurrection long ago. We've settled. Both schools agree. This is gobbledygook. You're not dangerous. Irrelevant. Anything that discourages Paul is going to be thought to be irrelevant. You're so smart. You're the philosophers of the world, and you're as blind as a bat because you think only stuff that's new is interesting to you, and you dismiss the most important thing in the history of the world, which is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Look at verse 33. Paul went out from their midst. I think he would have preferred to be arrested. Here's a quick note. Did he make any converts in the most intelligent city in the world? How disappointing. Some men joined. 2 names are mentioned, maybe 5. A small Athenian church may be left behind. We never have a record of a church in Athens. There are 5 today, but then we have the name of 2 people, Dionysus, one member of the school, 1 out of 50 or 100 philosophers. Dionysus, a member of the Areopagus, 1. And a woman named Damaris. Others, 3, 4, maybe a handful, probably not more than 2 hands. And then Paul leaves. He's discouraged. He comes discouraged to Athens, fleeing, didn't want to come that way. He leaves Athens discouraged because he's found that the educated people of his time are the most closed-minded people he's ever found. And this is disappointing.